What I was writing was original. I don't mean that I wasn't influenced by lots of other people and comedy programs that I thought were wonderful, especially The Goon Show, but what was going down on the paper was mine. And then I started becoming aware of something else that was interesting and very odd too. If I wrote a sketch by myself in the evening, I'd often get stuck and would sit there at my little desk cudgelling my brains, and eventually I'd give up and go to bed. And in the morning I'd wake up, make myself a cup of coffee, then I'd drift over to the desk and sit at it, and almost immediately the solution to the problem that I'd been wrestling with the previous evening became quite obvious to me. So obvious I couldn't really understand why I hadn't spotted it the night before. But I hadn't. And this is how I began to discover that if I put the work in before going to bed, I often had a little creative thought overnight, which fixed whatever problem it was that I was trying to deal with. It was like a gift, a reward for all my wrestling with the puzzle. And I began to think to myself, that can only be because while I'm asleep, my mind goes on working at the problem so that it can give me the answer in the morning. Now, this realization was very foreign to me. I'd always assumed that thinking was all about furrowing my brow and trying terribly hard. Now, what I was still wondering about this, something else occurred. I sometimes in those days collaborated with Graham Chapman, and we'd written a parody of a Church of England sermon. At that time, Graham and I were both obsessed with all the humour we could derive from the Bible. So much so that when people came into my room and saw an authorized version lying on my desk, they would say, "Oh, you've been writing sketches again." Now, Graham and I thought it was rather a good sketch, this parody of a sermon. It was therefore terribly embarrassing when I found I'd lost it. I knew Graham was going to be cross, so when I'd given up looking for it, I sat down and had to rewrite the whole thing from memory, and it actually turned out to be easier than I'd expected. And then I found the original sketch. And out of curiosity, I checked to see how well I'd recalled it when rewriting. And weirdly, I discovered that the remembered version was actually an improvement on the original that Graham and I had written. Now, this puzzled the hell out of me. Again, I was forced to the conclusion that my mind must have continued to think about the sketch after Graham and I had finished writing it, and that my mind had been improving what we'd written without my making any conscious attempt to do so. So that when I remembered it, it was already better. Chewing this over, I realized it was like the tip-of-the-tongue phenomenon, when you can't remember a name and you chase after it in your mind and you find you just cannot recall it. And then, a few moments later, when you're thinking about something completely else, the name pops into your mind. Clearly, your brain was still working on it even after you'd given up. So I began to realize that my unconscious was working on stuff all the time without my being consciously aware of it. The trouble with the word unconscious is that it has all sorts of connotations concerning Sigmund Freud and psychoanalysis. For him, the unconscious was like a dustbin into which you put all those nasty thoughts and feelings that you're frightened or ashamed of, and then you try and keep the lid on it until you are no longer strong enough, and then you have a nervous breakdown. But I'm using the word unconscious in a different sense. I'm describing what's going on quite normally in all of us, all of the time, without which we'd be overwhelmed by the sheer volume of the things we have to take care of in everyday life. For example, your physiology. When you've eaten, your body will digest the meal for you. There's simply no way that you can help it by trying to become conscious of the digestive process. The best you can do is to facilitate things by, for example, not eating 2 desserts before sprinting the 400 meters. Or consider blinking your eye or scratching an itch or licking your lips. These are all things that generally happen without you being conscious of what you're doing. If somebody throws a brick at you, you duck. You don't first carefully evaluate the alternatives. Even more demanding activities that require learned skills involve the same principle. You can shave or dress or tie your shoelaces without having to concentrate on what you're doing. Your body is used to do the necessary.
To keep listening to this audiobook for free, click the link in the description. It will take you to a free Audible trial where you can listen to this and many other books for free for 30 days.